Our guest has written a book titled Lead with We, the business revolution that will save our future. The book's message is simple. The future of profit is people's purpose aligned. Now, I don't know about you, but it got my attention, and it's an interesting idea for creating predictable business growth and scale, which we'll explore more of in just a moment. Hello, and welcome to the Predictable B2B Success podcast brought to you by Sproutwood.com. I am Vinay Kaushi, and our guest today is Simon Mainwaring. Simon, you're the founder and CEO of WeFirst, a strategic consultancy accelerating growth and impact for purpose-driven brands. You're a member of the steering committee of sustainable brands, the Forbes Business Council, and a fellow for the Royal Society of Arts. Now, I believe you were named the top 50 keynotes amongst the top 50 keynote speaker in the world by Real Leaders in 2020. And your company, WeFirst, was a Real Leaders Top 100 impact company in the US for 2021. Now, your latest book, Lead with We, The Business Revolution That Will Save Our Futures, is also a Wall Street Journal bestseller. The number 2 Forbes Best Business Book of the Year, McKinsey Top Business Bestseller on Workplace and Culture, and Axiom Gold Medalist for the leadership category. It was an official nominee for the Next Big Idea and a finalist for International Business Book of the Year. Quite a number of accolades for that book. And your previous book, WeFirst, How Brands and Consumers Use Social Media to Build a Better World, is also a New York Times and Wall Street Journal bestseller. Simon, I'm curious, with your latest book, was there a particular incident that inspired the writing of this book? If
Yeah,
so,
thanks. Thanks, Vinay. And I would say this, having written my first book 11 years ago, WeFirst, I have spent since then through my company, WeFirst, working inside large corporations and really exciting startups, helping them drive growth at scale by creating impact. After a decade of doing that, a very real concern showed up, which is that we are not moving far enough, fast enough in business to solve for the issues that are compromising our future, but just as importantly, compromising business itself. And so my preoccupation became speed and scale. How do we create a force multiplier inside your company so that you inspire all stakeholders to build your business with you, which in turn allows you to scale your impact? And that really was the driver for the book.
And would you say that the book has caused something of a movement, a purpose-driven, collaborative leadership movement?
I think, as any author will probably tell you, I think any book is really a distillation or sort of an aggregation of a lot of ideas that other people have expressed at different times. No one
Mm.
truly owns anything. And in that sense, I think it's representative of a larger movement out there in the world where we realize that we are all fundamentally connected to each other as human beings. We are fundamentally connected to the planet, and without the planet, our future does look very bleak. And there's a broader awakening in business and also amongst heads of state and leaders at Davos and business forums all around the world that we need to do something differently. And I think what the book did well was to translate that down into very simple and actionable language, this idea of leading with we, which is you choose to lead with as many stakeholders as possible in service of the largest we. And that can apply in payroll, that could apply in R&D, that could apply in marketing, it could apply in culture. And it could also look very different in Helsinki or Sydney or Berlin. So it had that sort of versatility and adaptability to it. So it could be applied to any business at any time through the lens of any culture or marketplace. And I think if you're going to have a solution that's going to work at scale, it has to be that adaptive.
So, and that's a very interesting idea. I'd love to explore that in a bit, but I'm also curious, given your journey to date, what would you say is your personal area of strength?
I think as someone who's been a long time advertising writer and author, I've always had a great fascination and love for the power of language. And over the years, I've built that muscle very aggressively for a long time. And the reason I believe it's so important is that language frames behavior. We use language to describe literally how we show up in the world. So if we change that language, we can actually change our mindsets and change our behavior. So I think my skill is really in leveraging very simple and accessible, but emotional language that resonates with people to inspire them to show up differently in a time when it's absolutely critical. I think that's where my strength lies.
And in that area of strength, what would you say is something that businesses don't know but should?
I think there's many cautionary tales I could tell you. If you're a startup, if you're a B2B company that wants to be really aggressive, high growth company, if you're a global enterprise with lots of moving parts and silos and business units and brands in your portfolio, one mistake most companies make is that they fail to recognize that you need to be the celebrant, not celebrity of your stakeholder community. And what I mean
Mhm.
by that is, especially if you're a B2B company, many companies go out there and they talk about themselves when they do good. They talk about the hours their employees volunteer, the contributions they're making, the sustainability of their supply chain. That is talking about themselves. And not surprisingly, it falls on deaf ears because no one wants to hear a company of any sort talk about themselves. Instead, you need to get off yourself and onto others. You need to talk about your suppliers. You need to celebrate your employees. You need to celebrate your customers and their stories, and by extension, consumers out there. And when you actually shift the focus from being self-directed and self-serving to being outbound and community focused, and to really position your brand as a platform on which your stakeholders stand, the type of content you create, the type of messaging you use, and the type of engagement you get is absolutely transformed. And this is when you start to unlock the power of being a movement as a brand, because
Mm.
everybody is working together to amplify what you're doing, because you're a platform on which they stand, and therefore it has interest to them. They engage with the content, they share it, they see themselves as part of your larger effort. And that's when you get a force multiplier for your business. And as somebody who's been lucky enough over the last 13 years of Weverse to work with the most exciting startups and purpose leaders like Tom's and Timberland and Virgin Unite and many others, as well as very large, complex global enterprises, you really get to have that pattern recognition to see what is the difference that makes all of the difference. And I cannot stress enough that if you're a B2B company that wants aggressive growth and also wants to play a meaningful role in the world, be the celebrant, not celebrity of your stakeholder community.
Hmm. Very interesting ideas there. But would you say there's perhaps a bit of tension in some organizations between the fact that most people would acknowledge that there is benefit in serving the greater we, but in almost a practical sense, a lot of the language and behaviors are very much that of a individualated approach in terms of the outcomes and the benefits that they're looking for, especially in the short term.
Sure. And I think the short term is a key word there. For a long time, business has been driven by whether it's analyst calls or quarterly reporting, or it's all about the bottom line, profit
Mm.
for profit's sake. The big shift that's happened in the last 5 to 10 years, and we've kicked the can down the road from the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, all the way to 2020s now, is we've realized that we've overplayed our hand. The planet doesn't have infinite resources. We can't go up and to the right in terms of growth indefinitely without it coming at some cost. And that cost, as we see it now, is the climate emergency, is the extreme weather it causes, is unsustainable agriculture in terms of the crops we need to make our clothing, is in terms of conscious consumers and employees who are worried about their future, saying, we will not work for, invest in, or buy from a company that is doing harm rather than doing good. And so, whether you are cynical at worst, or whether you really want to make a conscious impact at best, the market forces are rewarding companies that are showing up differently. And this legacy mindset that it's all about profit for profit's sake, or it's about the next quarter, is very rapidly being replaced by those companies that are taking a longer term perspective. The horizon line is further. They
Mhm.
lifted their eye to a further horizon line. And this comes from everyone from heads of state and global CEOs at Davos through to all the research done by competent boards and Just Capital and Edelman, all the way through to the anecdotal stories we see about those companies that are enjoying high growth. They're doing so on the strength of playing a meaningful role in the world. And here's the bottom line. What is the ROI of staying in business as a species? Quite honestly, I mean, it's almost an absurd question to ask now. What is the business case for actually making our planet sustainable in terms of our lives? What is the business case for creating a future for our children? If we have lost perspective, so much so that we don't in good conscience recognize that this planet we have is precious, that the lives around us are meaningful, and that we have created forces that we've unleashed upon ourselves that are now doing harm. Anything short of that is simply, at worst, it's reckless. but maybe it's naive. You look at the headlines every day. This has nothing to do with politics, nothing to do with politics. Just look at the headlines every day about what's going on, whether it's the Canadian fires sweeping across with the smoke across the southern and eastern states in the US, whether it's fires different places around the world, whether it's floods, whether it's extreme weather. Something is up and we need to show up differently so that our businesses can thrive, so that you can have the greatest bottom line benefit to your business. And if you don't do that, you've got no one to blame but yourself, because we really are in the red zone in terms of the scale and magnitude of the challenges we're facing.
I'm sure there's listeners going, Simon, that sounds fantastic. And I really wish I could do or be part of the solution. But more often than not, I'm confronted with the fact that I have a business to run. If I'm not making a profit, I'm going to have to let go of my employees. And to me, that's a mission in itself. Is there is there really a possibility of correlating the ideals that you're talking about with actual bottom line profit? Because if I can't see the correlation, how do I make this work?
Yeah, that question is framed in terms of an outlook or mindset that I think really passed about 10 years ago. This false separation between purpose and profit. If you look at any of the data out there, and I mentioned Just Capital or Competent Boards or Edelman, if you look at the latest reports on the stock market across the various indices and so on, those companies that are playing a meaningful role are being better received in terms of IPOs, in terms of capital raising, in terms of employee retention, in terms of building a resilient culture, in terms of attracting and keeping the talent they need, in terms of winning the purchases of conscious
Mhm.
consumers. It's simply inaccurate and, to a large degree, out of touch to suggest you've got to make money over here as opposed to doing good over here. It's simply out of touch with the market forces, the reality of the market that we live in today. That's not my opinion. That is the research that's out there that you can do quite independently. And instead of them being in this sort of false separation, we've got to make money over here or do good, they are actually dovetailed in. And I'll explain what I mean. So sometimes you will talk about your purpose at a company, and that will help you attract employees. It'll carve out a reputational differentiation in the marketplace and so on. And sometimes you'll talk about your product, its price and its benefits. But when you talk about your purpose, you point to your products as social proof of that. When you talk about your products, you point back to your purpose as the context for why the products are that way. I'll give you a concrete example. Let me give you a concrete example. I'll give you many. Just think about the auto industry. In 2011, when I wrote my first book, the traditional combustion engine auto industry was trying to run Elon Musk and Tesla out of town very aggressively. It was all over the headlines. He was crazy. He was this, he was that. And yes, he's a colorful character, and let's put that aside. Here we are in 2023, and every single major US automaker has committed to phase out completely combustion engines and commit completely to alternative energy vehicles. In a short space of 11 years or 12 years, the most kind of ingrained and, in inverted commas, American industry has transitioned completely. Look at the apparel industry, all the clothing brands that we know, one of the biggest industries in the world. They are all falling over themselves, talking about how sustainable they are, their regenerative agricultural practices to grow the cotton they need, how they recycle or upcycle or re-commerce their products. Take a look at the beauty industry and all the different beauty brands talking about clean beauty or pure beauty. Take a look at the shopping aisle that you go to every day. It is like Vegas with all of these different brands screaming about the credentials of their product, how they were grown, how their employees were treated, how they're going to actually contribute in some way, whether it's through labor practices or women's empowerment or whatever it might be. So don't take my word for it. I think the only caution I have is that, especially in the B2B category, sometimes you have this legacy thinking where you go, why aren't I growing the way that I want? Why aren't the mindset and practices that I've used for a long time working today? And I deeply believe it's because we're not being clear-eyed about the reality of the world that we're living in. If you're a B2B company, your customers with their consumers are saying, are you defensible in public? Do you give
Mm.
me a story that will make me defensible to my employees, to my consumers? So B2B now is really B2C. I think of B2B as B2C. And in that sense, I don't see that there's this dichotomy between purpose and profit. In fact, I'd say the opposite is true. And again, that's not my opinion. Do the research, have a look, and also have a look at what your competitors are doing. See how they're showing up. Are they showing up any differently in terms of defining their purpose, their role in the world? Check out their websites. Check out about how they're talking about their products. And you'll realize that mindset, which is, oh, I've got to make money over here, so I can't get to doing good, is absolutely outdated. And it's one of the reasons you're not enjoying the growth that you deserve.
Hmm. You make a very powerful case there. With someone who's perhaps cottoning onto this idea and realizes that perhaps this idea of instilling purpose in the business requires something of a culture change. Are
How do
there,
you go?
first off, as a leader or as the executive leaders of the company, are there certain criteria that they need to grapple with before they start looking at culture?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'll back up for a second. The reason I wrote the book Lead with We is for the last 13 years, we've been doing this work inside large and small companies. It really lays out a roadmap for how you walk through this process with a view to what? Accelerating growth by scaling impact. So it's all about your bottom. Let's never lose sight of that. With that as context, the process by which a leadership team must go is they must firstly ask themselves one simple question. Are you doing this for real? If you're a B2B company that wants aggressive growth, that wants to build your bottom line, that wants relevance to the future, that wants to outstrip your competitors, do you genuinely believe that being clear about the role your company is playing in the world is an important step to take? Because if you're only doing it because you feel you should or
Mhm.
somebody else is doing it, it's tantamount to greenwashing, and it really isn't helpful to your company. That's question number one. Then secondly, you have to define your company purpose. And I'll give you an example of how you do that, especially as a B2B company. 3 questions you can ask yourself. What is your enemy? And by that, what is that thing that you exist to solve for? What is that thing that makes you angry in your industry, in your product category, that you go, no, we've got a better way of doing this? What is that enemy? Secondly, what are you the only of? There is only one B2B company like yours with your leadership team at this moment in time, and so on. What are you the only of? And then thirdly, when you're at your best, what are you doing? When you are just crushing it, when you close that great contract, when you've got your product into more doors, whatever it might be, when your e-commerce has exploded, what are you doing at that moment when you're really firing on all cylinders? And in the book, I lay out a lot more questions that we've used on all these brands that people know, but it's in the book. But there's three examples. So decide if you're doing it for real, define your purpose on the strength of questions like that. And then to your question about culture, then what you've got to do is a couple of things. Number one, you have to share it with your employees. You may have 5 employees, you may have 500,000 employees, but you've got to let them know what that is. What is that animating force inside the company that will help them go, you know what? I like to work here, or I know why I work here, or I understand why my role is playing a meaningful contribution to that larger goal. And it really helps with retention. You're not having this churn, losing people. So once you've told them, then you have to make sure that there's a co-creative opportunity to bring them to life, to bring it to life. One of the big mistakes I see today in the work that we do, and we're doing culture building for some of the largest companies in the world, is there's this mistake where if you're a B2B company, you feel like your employees, it's almost this adversarial relationship where what has leadership done for me lately? What has my CEO done for me lately? What has the management team done for me lately? I could get $5,000 more over here. I'm going to walk because I'm working remote anyway. I'm not really connected to the people. I'm out of here. The next thing you've got to do is give them co-creative ways to participate. So you've told them, you've defined if you're doing it for real, you've defined your purpose, you've shared it with them. And then you say, hey, how could we bring this to life? Let's do some breakout groups. Let's do some forums. Let's do some surveys. Let's ask for a hackathon for some ideas. How could we bring this to life in ways that add value to the business? And when you do that, something amazing happens. They buy into your purpose because they're already thinking through how to bring it to life. They buy into the company culture because they're part of bringing it to life. And that culture can be sustained over time, despite global supply chain, despite Ukraine, despite COVID, because they're all building it with you. And that's really the biggest distinction I draw. Your culture is not what you as a CEO or founder creates every day. Your culture is what you and all of your employees co-create every day by how by who and how you show up inside that organization. And again, when you shift your mindset from leadership, doing it for your teams, to we're doing it together, everything changes.
Could you expand on this idea of who and how we show up?
Yeah.
What does that look like?
I'll give you some examples. One of the great mistakes that companies make in terms of building a culture that can be really productive and really resilient in this crazy world is they make mistakes in the hiring process where they hire people for skill, but not for culture fit. But once you've defined your purpose, and you've defined your values as an organization, then people self-select. And what you're doing is you're fortifying your culture by virtue of who you hire, instead of realizing, oh no, we've just hired 3 bad apples because we just wanted to fill those spots as
Mhm.
quickly as possible. And now they're poisoning the culture. Secondly, you've got to make sure that your culture has its values or mindsets defined. If you look at a company like, for example, Moderna, which has had hyper growth, B2B company, they have defined the 12 mindsets that define what it means to work at Moderna. And if you go to their website, you'll see the 12 mindsets listed there. And that really is an indication of who should apply to work there, how you show up when you are working there, and how those forces fuel productivity and fulfillment and well-being for everyone who works at the company. So all of that is to say, from your hiring process, all the way through to your values and mindsets that you define and share with your employees, you're qualifying who should work at your company, how you should show up on a daily basis, and on the strength of those commitments, how that will execute against your purpose and drive your business growth as a result.
Okay. So you're almost suggesting that the companies should really be purpose driven, if I can put this another way, almost cause driven in their approach to business as almost a competitive advantage for the future. Would that be correct?
I draw a few distinctions here. One is cause marketing. I'm going to support cancer research. I'm going to do a jogathon. I'm going to give to an LGBTQ group, or I'm going to show up on Earth Day. Those cause efforts are one expression of your foundational purpose. But your purpose as an organization informs everything that you do, all the way upstream from your suppliers, where you source your material, how you manufacture your products, how you treat your people, what products you make, how you take them to market. And then at the end of all of that, you may have some CSR, some corporate responsibility, some philanthropy, some give back that would involve a cause. But the cause component is just one small little bell or whistle at the end of a foundational purpose that really defines how the whole organization shows up. And again, please don't take my word for it. Look at everyone from GE to Unilever. They're the largest B2B and B2C companies in the world, all falling over themselves to talk about the role that they're playing in the world. They're not doing that just because they have a sense of conscience in terms of their responsibility towards the future and the future generations of their workers and their families and so on. They're doing it because they recognize that these are the market forces. These are the expectations of stakeholders out there. So coming back to your question, I think it's appropriate for any company to have some sort of philanthropic cause, CSR commitment, and it might be through the lens of being a B Corp or committing to the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, or ESG commitments, these environmental, social, and governance commitments that you hear so much of these days. Or it might be none of those things. It might be just a commitment they have. But that's letting the tail wag the dog. You have to have a foundational purpose that informs the whole company first. And then as a
Well,
function of that, you'll have some cause effort.
would it be unrealistic to expect that if you're moving towards being a purpose driven brand, then you would have a community or a following, as it were, beyond just your employees? It would also include your customers and perhaps other stakeholders. And if that is the case, then how do we inspire them to become part of this co-creation effort,
Yeah.
especially with storytelling and advocacy?
Yeah. The aspiration, the goal, the whole idea behind Lead with We is to engage with as many stakeholders as
Mhm.
possible, as I mentioned. And the way you go about that, firstly, is defining that foundational purpose, but that's then a slingshot for a movement you lead. And that movement starts with your strategy and goals at the leadership level. It then builds with your employees through your company culture. It then expands through your brand out into your consumer communities and the partners you work with. And then it goes even further out into society where you're taking on social issues. And what I mean by that is I've been in the marketing world for 25 years. And I would say probably up to 10 years ago, business didn't really have a place in social or cultural issues. Like business took care of business and that was it. Now, everything from same-sex marriage to abortion to gun control to the war in Ukraine to President Zelensky calling out Mark Schneider at Nestle about whether Nestle is doing business in Russia. You've got the sitting president of a country at war talking to a global CEO in the press. There's no limit to the expectation on business now. So it really is about expanding all the way through from a personal commitment from you as an employer, as a leader, out through your leadership goals, your company culture, your brand communities, and out to society at large, and pulling it all the way through. And here's the distinction that makes all the difference, Vinay. You are demonstrating a commitment to something larger than your company itself. And I'll give you an example so this doesn't sound like theory. And all of this, I want to remind your listeners, everything I'm sharing with you are insights from inside the boardrooms, the SLTs, the ELTs, and the founders of some of the most exciting and largest and most successful companies in the world. This is not me being an author or a thought leader or just putting abstract ideas out there. I'm telling you what's going on and what they're talking about. So I really, hand on my heart, want to share that with you. Airbnb, their purpose is to create a world where anyone can belong anywhere. They're not the accommodation business, but because they have this commitment to universal belonging, they allow you to belong in Paris when you stay in someone's apartment. But they also have city guides and restaurant guides and music guides. They have all of these service offerings that are all part of belonging anywhere in the world. Now, at the same time, to your point about causes, they also have their open homes program, which means they're currently with their hosts giving free accommodation to Ukrainian refugees because that's part of universal belonging. The same way they did Syrian refugees or the victims of the Paris bomb attack. So this idea, this larger commitment that informs an entire company shapes the give back, the impact it has, but also the products and services it takes to market.
Right. I'm also curious. I believe you talk about the virtuous spiral in the book. Could you tell us more about it and how we could apply it within our own business?
Yeah, this stuff, unless you're in the marketing world or unless you're in the strategy world and quite understandably, you're caught up in running a business every day, it's tough to get your arms around all of this stuff. And we're lucky enough working across all these industries and all these brands, large and small, get the pattern recognition of what's working or not. And the purpose of doing a book is to lay that out for you. So you don't need to do all that work. So lead with we is those three key words you can use. And then the virtuous spiral is all about collectivized purpose and action. What does that mean? All that means is that you're unlocking the value of your purpose at multiple levels. So I'll give you an example. I, as an individual, have to choose. I got kids. I got a 24-year-old daughter and a 21-year-old daughter. I care about their future. I'm worried when I look at my phone each day and I see the headlines. I go, damn, are they going to be okay? They don't not even sure if they want kids anymore because of the world, the way the world is. So do I, as an individual, want to show up and play a meaningful role? How do I do that? Where do I put my money? I mean, where does the bank that I put my money in use that money? What food do I eat? What car do I drive? Where do I go on a holiday? What can I do in my individual life to make a small difference? Even in the products I select when I go into the shopping aisle. Then the next level of that spiral is leadership. So in your capacity in a company, whether you're leading in payroll, whether you're leading as a founder, whether you're leading as a CEO, how can you define the purpose of your company and share it with everyone so they understand what it is? So there's the individual level is the first level of the spiral. The next level up is your leadership level. The third level is company culture. So how do you inspire all the different people who work inside your company from 5 to 500,000 people to be really committed to that purpose? And we touched on some of that before. Then above that, you've got the brand community, which is external. If the culture was internal, the brand community is external. Your consumers, the partners you work with. And then above that, you've got that societal level where you're taking on these larger issues, whether it be war in Ukraine or any of the other things I've mentioned. And then finally, above that, at the top level of the spiral, is what I call the transcendent level, which is really just this balance between humanity and the planet. I think it would be pretty hard to argue against the fact that for the last 100 years, business has been showing up in a way all around the world, irrespective of politics, that's had a negative effect on a lot of people's lives and on the planet. And we're seeing all the results: carbon in the air, poisons in the soil, plastics in the ocean. It's everywhere. It's not my point of view.
Mhm.
It's where. And so at that transcendent level, how do we work at the individual, leader, culture, community, societal, and transcendent level in a spiral going upwards so that the benefits compound, but like a spiral, the benefits also flow back down in a helix. The
Hmm.
benefits flow back down to all the various stakeholders. And again, this all comes back, Vinay, to the point I made at the beginning, which is I'm lying here 3 years ago in my bed at night going, a lot of people are doing good. A lot of companies are changing what they're doing. A lot of leaders are thinking differently, but we're not getting far enough, fast enough. If you listen to the IPC report and its updates around climate, if you look at the headlines every day, you go, wow, we're in trouble now and it's only getting worse. Yesterday, I'm not sure what date this podcast comes out. Yesterday was the hottest day on earth ever recorded. Here we are in July of 2023. Hottest day on earth ever recorded, and it's going to get worse. It's going to create real problems. Again, irrespective of politics, if you look at any of the data in and around this, and it's going to be your life, it's going to be my life, it's going to be our kids' future. So what could we do differently today so that we leverage the market forces that are rewarding companies doing good so that we have an impact and build our business at the same time? There's real power in that. And I think it's the most exciting entrepreneurial opportunity I've ever seen, especially for B2B companies.
Yeah, that's a very different way of thinking. I'm just curious with what you said last, this idea of leveraging the rising market forces to accelerate growth and impact. Should we just be looking at what best aligns with our purpose in order to leverage some of these market forces, or
Yeah.
is there more to the thinking behind that?
Yeah. The question then becomes, if you want to explore, again, with the view to your bottom line and
Mhm.
impact, want to explore this way of thinking, you go, where do I begin? And I talked about asking yourself, do you mean it? Defining your purpose, sharing it internally, and then co-creating its execution. But then there's table stakes that you have to address. If you want to be in business today, if you want to have a social license to operate, if you want to be defensible as
Mhm.
compared to your competitors or outright to your stakeholders, you've got to deliver a fair and living wage. You've got to have some sort of diversity effort, D&I, JEDI, all the different acronyms around diversity. And you also have to have some sort of sustainability commitment. Because if you're treating your people poorly, if you're poisoning the planet with what you're making, you're going to be run out of business before you know it. Not just because you'll be exposed, but because the regulations are just exponentially increasing and you're going to be put out of business. With all of that in mind, these table stakes, fair and living wage, diversity and inclusion, and sustainability, you've then got to find something that's authentic to your brand. It's not about picking any issue out there and going, well, everyone seems to be talking about that, so I'm going to commit to that. But rather it's saying, okay, if our purpose is X, what is the most logical thing that we can commit to? So I'll give you an example, and it's going to be dynamic. IBM, one of the largest B2B companies in the world, they have a program called Call for Code. And you just look up IBM Call for Code and you'll see it. Every year, they have an open source competition where they open up IBM software and invite developers inside IBM and all around the world to use their code to solve for the world's most pressing issue. This year, it's
Hmm.
around sustainability. In the past, it's been climate. In the past, it's been COVID. But they're doing it in a very dynamic way where each year, because the world is moving so fast, they're saying, how can our code and the tools it enable be applied to the most relevant issues? For some companies, it might be, if it's a women-owned business or women-led business, it might be women's empowerment or girls' empowerment. For some companies, it might be specific to their category. Like if they're in the food industry, it might be sustainable agriculture. But the way to stress test it is to go, is it authentic? Is it defensible? And is it impactful? And if you can really answer those questions for yourself, then you're committing to something that's going to really serve your business. And that's the other point I'd make is when you do this authentically, then you're committed to something that makes sense in terms of your business, and that goodwill, the ROI of it in terms of being defensible, being relevant, attracting
Mhm.
talent, getting consumer consumption, the goodwill of customers, competitive differentiation, then you'll unlock all those benefits to your business. If you do it disingenuously and just throw efforts or money at whatever you think is just out there, then it'll fall on deaf ears because it's not genuine.
Certainly. And I can see the benefits of this way of thinking, how it would impact the company, etc., and the thinking behind being purpose driven. However, in an organization, I would imagine that as you try to align everyone together towards a greater purpose, I'm curious, from your perspective, is there also a need to look at each individual and their own personal
Yeah.
purpose and motivations?
Yeah, it's a great question. One of the most dangerous things you can do is presume you understand the mind or motivation of people, which is something
Mhm.
very private. And there's a couple of ways you can address it. There's a lot of work that you can do about how to give your employees the opportunity to find their personal purpose. And I think all of us, especially after this crazy 3.5 years with COVID and so much more, kind of ask ourselves, what's life about and what are we doing and what's important to us and how do we want to spend our time and where am I working and what's the
Mm.
future like? But it's really forced all of us to go, damn, what's going on? The world's gone crazy. So the personal purpose is very important in that context. And it's really what motivates you to get out of bed in the morning. It's really what fuels you, what drives you. And again, I would invite you to look and lead with we to understand how to define your personal purpose and also how you can bring that to life inside your company. The second thing I'd say is how you want to bring it to life is as important as what your personal purpose is. For example, some people might like to volunteer. Some people might like to write blog posts. Some people might like to do a hackathon and come up with innovation ideas. Some people might like to be in the background and just manage the finances of donations or whatever might be raised. So you have to create this toolkit of ways to participate for employees so it doesn't feel prescriptive to them. It's not like we care about this, therefore we've got to do this, but rather this is what the company is committed to. What are your ideas for how we can bring this to life? And how would you like to participate? And we do so much cultural work for mid-size and large companies that realize that they've got to put some systems around this as they scale. And time and again, all I see is that there's a group that will self-select always to lead this charge that are always like just chomping at the bit to get at this stuff because that's
Mm.
always who they've been. They've always been volunteering at a pet shelter on the weekend. They've always given to these causes. They've always wanted to have that purposeful role in life. They will self-select and they can be purpose ambassadors inside the company. Then there'll be other groups that want to show up in different ways. Some are organizers, some are content creators, some are fundraisers. And much like people are different in different
Mm.
ways, they'll show up in terms of your purpose in ways that are specific to them.
Brilliant. Yeah, I'm curious with this idea of changing culture. Obviously, there needs to be an element of codifying culture and communicating that on a regular basis. What are the best ways that you've seen this happen in successful organizations?
Codifying culture is really important as you grow because not only does growth create stresses, but now I feel like every 3 months there's a different crisis.
Yeah.
At the beginning of this year, Q1 and Q2, all the talk of inflation and all the tech layoffs paralyzed the economy. And we
Hmm.
just saw so much struggle, having just come out of COVID, having still going through Ukraine, before that global supply chain, before that, the BLM protests around the world after the tragic murder of George Floyd. If you're in a leadership position at a company of any size, I swear to God, it's feel like you've been whacked over the head 20 times over the last 3 years. It's just been so codifying culture allows you to withstand that. And the way that I think about leadership now is you've almost got to be like a gyroscope or a steady cam. You see those cameras that the cameramen wear and they're running through filming a
Mm.
scene, but the camera stays steady. You've got to stay steady while you get all these shocks that you've got to absorb around you. And one of the ways is to do that with your culture. And there's some key components. And again, this is all laid out in Lead with We. And also, I have a podcast called Lead with We that's on all the podcast channels. And I interview all of the different kind of leaders of these companies, global CEOs, CMOs, and CSOs. And the podcast with Moderna and how they built their culture to withstand all the pressure of COVID was unbelievable. So Lead
Mm.
with We, the podcast. But number one, define your purpose so that you actually have that North Star, that guiding principle that informs everything. Secondly, define your values, your behaviors, your mindsets so that people are clear about how they need to show up inside the organization. Third, have rituals and traditions. And that is, for example, a ritual might be at all hands meeting once a quarter or once a month when you get the whole team together in person or virtually these days. Point back to your purpose. Celebrate an employee who's shown up in a meaningful way. Talk about an initiative of the company that's delivering on that purpose. Keep that purpose balloon up in the air. Don't let it sink to the ground. Announce it, and then nothing happens. Traditions are like, for example, an annual volunteer day, like you see with Timberland with their Path to Service, where they get close to 90% of employees out planting trees and doing things. What we do at We First, my company, once a quarter, we ask the team, we're based here in Los Angeles, but the team is spread out all over the US, ask the team what they would like to volunteer for. And we've done pet shelters, urban gardens, soup kitchens. A couple of weeks ago, we volunteered and planted and provided services at the LA Zoo. So the animals were taken care of, and just create that tradition where your employees can have input on the ways that they actually want to show up. And it's so interesting. Every time I've done that, Renee, I go, oh, we can't take a day from work. We've got too much going on. There's too many projects. It's irresponsible. We should keep the thing going. And every time at the end of the day, I go, that was the best use of time we ever did. Best use of time. We get out of the office. We spend time together. The team reconnects. We do something meaningful. We feel good about ourselves. We have a laugh, and we almost restore ourselves and reconnect with why it's so meaningful to us to play an impactful role in the world. And if you do those various things, from defining your purpose in a co-creative way, build those rituals and traditions, put the systems, the structure in place, you will have a resilient culture. And then the last thing I'll mention is you've got to tell the stories internally. A lot of companies, B2B or B2C, do a good job, digital, social, or otherwise, telling their story out there in the world, but they don't tell the story of their purpose or their role in the world to their own employees. Employees have got other choices as to where to work. Employees have got a lot of stresses on their lives. Employees who are looking to feel good about where they work. So make sure when you are making a difference on the strength of your purpose, capture some of that content. It's just as simple as getting someone from anywhere in the company to pick up their iPhone and say, the most meaningful thing about working at my company X is, and what I had a really special event when we did this. And the reason it's so meaningful to me is this, and share that. It's so darn simple, but you've got to tell the story as well. And that will keep people engaged.
Brilliant. I'm sure there's lots of areas that we could explore this in further, but to bring things to a close, Simon, are there perhaps a couple of areas with this new way of thinking, relatively new way of thinking that you find doesn't get much airtime, doesn't get talked about very much? If so, what would they be?
One of the things that I'm most encouraged by, but also disheartened by, is there is so much amazing work going on to course correct our future, and it doesn't get the airtime. And the reason it doesn't get the airtime is A, most of the people doing it are too busy doing the work and they're not looking for the credit. And B, the news and social media thrives on negativity, clickbait, and all that sort. I think the number of hands on the wheel right now in terms of fixing things, the engagement of younger demographics around it, the inspiration of these innovators who are totally disrupting product categories and industries and thinking about it in new ways that regenerate the planet and restore our future. And the force multiplying effect of all of those things is absolutely extraordinary, so positive, and such a great cause for optimism, but people don't hear enough about it. And if you just look at the headlines every day and look around at your industry, you might be disheartened. You might be hopeless. You might be worried about the future. And I wish people could see more of what's going on, because if you only see it when you look for it, when you look for the good news, if you look for the sort of the positive impacts that are being created, you suddenly go, wow, humanity is showing up in a really meaningful way. So my recommendation would be to moderate the amount of news that you look at, because I don't know that it's necessarily healthy in terms of your mental health and well-being. I think have a healthy perspective on social media on the weekends. I create content, but I don't look at social media because I need a break. I think it can be very hard on you and it polarizes people. And then consciously look for the positive stories out there, because there are amazing things happening. And if you actually make that shift, after 1 month, you're like, I don't feel so bad. After 3 months, you're like, wow, this is actually, things are okay. After 6 months, you substantively change how you feel because you're focusing on the right things. And if you don't do that, it's very easy to feel overwhelmed and disheartened. So I would recommend that. There's a lot of great stuff going on. And I don't think this is the end of anything, Vinay. I think this is the beginning of the most exciting renaissance in business we've ever seen. where we're going to start to work with the planet rather than against it. And the companies that embrace that and embrace those market forces are going to be the new leaders of the future, the new billionaires, the new massive success stories out there, because they're combining what the market forces are rewarding with what the planet needs at a time when we have to do it.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Simon, to wrap things up, if you were listening to this episode, what would you say would be your top takeaway?
Top takeaway, I think my hope would be that every one of us can be a force multiplier for each other. We got into this mess together. What you did, Vinay, the products you bought, the plastic you threw away, the car you drove, what I did every day of my life. And we're going to get out of this mess together. The little things that you do in your company, the little things that I do in my company, sure, they're small in and of themselves. But when all of us start changing the way we think and behave, especially through business,
Mm.
it does compound. We create the synergies between those efforts, and we can really accelerate and scale our response to these challenges we face. Hopefully, recognize that you are a force multiplier the moment you make a decision to be very conscious in your choices.
Brilliant. And if the listeners are curious and want to find out more or connect with you, where would you recommend they head to?
If they have any questions or you want to talk about the consulting that we do at WeFirst, the small companies all the way through to large ones, you can just simply reach me at simon@wefirstbranding.com. Simon@wefirstbranding. If you want to hear the firsthand stories of some of the top, most successful, smartest marketers and sustainability officers and CEOs and founders in the world, tune into leadwithwe.com. Tune into leadwithwe.com. It's a podcast on Apple, Google, and Spotify. And we just have some of the top thinkers and business practitioners in the world talking about how they get it done. And then if you want a roadmap that takes all the work that we've done over the last 10 years and gives you a step-by-step plan so that your business can lead with we, so that you can drive growth and accelerate impact, just go to Amazon and get Lead with We. The book has been very well received and there's a lot of value in there. And we've put it out there so that you can thrive and so that our future can be something we look forward to.
We'll include links to that in the show notes. Simon, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you to everyone listening. And Vinay, thank you for all that you're doing. Really appreciate it.
Mm.